pathetically illiberal, and it's a massive problem. What's the point of calling yourself a liberal if you don't allow anyone else to have a different view?
It's been almost 3 years since Trump won the presidency. He looks exactly the same. I mean, his hair is like, I don't know what's going on with that, but look, he may do things that presidents in the past haven't done to augment their physical reality, but it could also be that he doesn't care the way others have.
Everyone's offended by everything. They just want to tell people not just how to lead their lives, but if you don't lead it the way I tell you to. It's a kind of version of fascism.
When Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King had been assassinated in the 70s.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to a brand new broadcast edition of Focal Point on the American Family Radio Network. I am Brian Fisher, congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent.
As always.
And you, as always, are my congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent listening audience. Glad to have you in the listening audience today. This is Focal Point, reclaiming America 1 hour at a time. This is the home of high-definition radio, more content per cubic inch of air than any other place on your radio dial. Well, let's take a deep dive right away into the Word of God. Pray.afa.net is the place to go if you'd like to read the Scriptures with me, with us, and pray the Scriptures with me and with us. You can do it right there. Pray.afa.net. We're just beginning a brand new 3-year cycle. And where we are right now is in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. This reading schedule begins with Luke's Gospel, which, remember, he said is very thoroughly researched, it's accurate, it's orderly, it's based on eyewitness testimony, so we can count on the record that we have here of Luke. He's not making anything up. None of this is manufactured. It's all a result of eyewitness testimony of the people that were there, people that saw it, the people that heard it, were the ones that are the source of these stories. Now we're told in chapter 6, verse 12, that he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. He was picking his disciples, so it was an indication of just how critical this decision was to the Lord. And of course, the lesson for us is the bigger the decision, the more prayer we need to invest. The bigger the decision, the more the prayer. So Jesus prays all night. God gives him wisdom and counsel about who to pick. He picked Simon, whom he nicknamed Peter. This is one of the marks of affection that the Lord showed for his disciples. He nicknamed his best friends, gave him nicknames. Simon was nicknamed Rocky. That's what Petros means. Peter, it means rock. Nicknamed him Rocky. Remember, elsewhere we find out that James and John were the sons of Zebedee. He nicknamed them the sons of thunder. So they were boisterous. They were aggressive. They were assertive, which is an indication. We think of Jesus picking all of these kind of mild-mannered milksops to be his disciples. He didn't. He loved these guys. It cracked him up that they were so assertive, so he nicknamed them the sons of thunder. And then he nicknamed Simon the Zealot, Simon who was called a zealot. Zealot just means you are on fire. This was a hyper disciple, and Jesus had to keep calming him down. So he called him the Zealot because he was on fire all the time. And then we're introduced in verse 16 to Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. This is an important thing to remember when it comes to ministry, when it comes to mentoring, when it comes to discipleship. Don't forget that even Jesus lost one. When you think about the fact he was betrayed, maybe you've been betrayed. I've been betrayed a couple of times in my life in pretty major ways. And it comes from the person that you would least expect. That's what happened to Jesus. I remember when I've been betrayed, if I were to make up a list of the 500 people who were least likely to sell me out, the people that did it would have been at the very top of my list. So it'll take you off guard. It'll be like getting hit in the gut with a gut shot. That's how it'll feel. And Judas Iscariot was like that. He was one of the chosen 12. Christ invested time in him, was led by God to pick him as his disciple, and yet he was the one that betrayed him. So let's not be surprised if it happens to us. Then we're told in verse 18, when Jesus is ministering, people from all over that area, that those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. Now, you cannot study the life of Jesus without believing in the reality of spiritual warfare. One reason for the weakness of the church, I'm convinced, is that we don't understand spiritual warfare. We don't study it. We don't learn how to engage in it, largely because we are afraid of the entire subject. Time to get over that and become instructed and adept in spiritual warfare. Now he begins the version of the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, here in chapter 6. And Jesus, in verse 20 through 23, refers to those who are poor, those who are hungry, and those who weep. And I'm sure I'm talking right now to people in this listening audience that are poor in one way or another. It may be you're financially strapped. You're under tremendous financial pressure. It may be a poverty of emotional resources. You feel tapped out, emptied out, bankrupt in soul and spirit. You're hungry. Maybe you don't have enough groceries to feed your family. Maybe it's that kind of a hunger. Maybe you're hungry for things like hope and stability and peace. And maybe some of you are weeping. That's what you do when you're experiencing great sorrow and great pain. And Jesus talks directly to his followers that were experiencing those things. And basically his point here is, don't forget that the last chapter in your life, in your circumstance, has not been written. And when it is, you are going to like it. So the poor will be fed, the hungry will be satisfied, and those who weep will be comforted. Then he says in verse 22, if you follow me, you are going to run into people who hate you, who exclude you from polite company, who keep you out of their groups and their clubs. They will revile you. They will spurn your name as evil. You know, you realize right now on the left, Christian is a dirty word. To people on the left, you and I, we are beneath contempt. We're something, someone, people to laugh at and to ridicule. And he says, if this happens to you on account of the Son of Man, in other words, it doesn't count if it happens to us because we're just obnoxious, doesn't count. But if it's because we have stood for Christ, stood for his truth, if we don't bend, if we don't back down, if we don't compromise, if we don't capitulate, if we stand for the truth, Jesus says it doesn't matter how nicely you do it, there will be people who will despise you. You got a lot of Christians who believe that if Christians dislike you, somehow it's your fault. But Jesus says, no, that's not the case. No matter how nicely you do it, you can be nicer than Jesus, and they will still hate you if you stand without apology for the truth. And then Jesus issues a warning in verse 26. He says, woe to you when all people speak well of you. Woe to you. He says, a blessing is on you when they speak evil of you. That's the way our fathers spoke to the prophets. But beware, be careful, be worried when all people speak well of you. And I think what he's putting his finger on is this is what happens when we try to make all the wrong people like us. When we try to make all the wrong people say nice things about us, we run into the judgment that Jesus speaks of here. Then he talks in verse 29 about the kind of character we are to demonstrate as his followers. He says, when somebody strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. When someone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. Now notice Jesus does not say when someone strikes you on the jaw. That's assault, that's battery. We're allowed to defend ourselves. in those circumstances. No, when somebody strikes you on the cheek, you think about it, that's a slap. It's a backhanded slap. If you're facing a right-handed dude and you get struck on your right cheek, he has to use the back of his hand to do it. It's a backhanded slap. It's an insult. It's not assault and battery. It's an insult. And Jesus says if you get struck on the jaw, somebody slaps you, somebody insults you, don't cover up. Offer them the other cheek as well. Don't insult them back. Then he says in verse 35, love your enemies and do good to those who can't pay you back. Your reward, Jesus says, if you do that, will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for he is, listen to this, he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. And it's good that he is, ladies and gentlemen, because that is the only way that we got in. Therefore, Jesus says, be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Well, if you'd be kind enough to join me, let's go to prayer for ourselves, for our families, and for our land. Every day is a National Day of Prayer at Focal Point. Lord Jesus, I pray this day for myself. I pray for my family. I pray for the listening audience of Focal Point, every man, woman, and child right now within the sound of my voice. We pray for every man, woman, and child in this land, for our elected officials, every mayor, every governor, and for our president, President Trump. And I pray that you will prompt us, as you prompted Jesus, to find a quiet place where we may spend time in prayer when faced with important decisions. Prompt us to embrace your teaching so that your power may flow from you into our lives to heal us and to free us from any trouble caused by the enemy of our souls. I claim for us your promise that you will grant us the kingdom of God, that you will grant the kingdom of God to the poor, that you satisfy the hungry, and that you bring laughter to those who weep. When men hate us, exclude us, insult us, and reject our name as evil because of you, I pray that we will rejoice in that day and leap for joy, recognizing that our reward in heaven is great. May we heed your warnings to those who do not follow you and are rich, well-fed, and laugh now. Open our eyes to see the ultimate poverty, hunger, and mourning of those who rely on anything and everything but you. I pray that we will never compromise the truth or compromise our consciences in order to have all men speak well of us. I pray that we will love our enemies, that we will do good to those who hate us, that we will turn the other cheek, and that we will lend to others without expecting or demanding anything in return. May we bless those who curse us and pray for those who mistreat us. I pray that we will do to others as we wish them to do to us, so that our reward will be great, and that we may be sons of the Most High. Lord, your Father is kind to the ungrateful and evil. May we too be merciful, even as he has been merciful to us. This I ask in your name. Amen. All right. Going to get into some content dealing with the news of the day, and we got a lot of stories, so many stories, so little time. So we're getting ready to hit the ground running. Just one little personal detail. Today is my wedding anniversary, 43 years with the bride of my youth. And haven't forgotten how we're going to celebrate it yet. We're just so swamped with getting moved in and acclimatized and adjusted to life here in our new home. We're not even sure what we're going to do to celebrate. But I am in love with my wife. She's the bride of my youth. Happily married. She's my support. She's my helpmate. She's my companion. Cannot even imagine my life apart from her. So thank you, God, for the gift of my bride, Debbie. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. One of the things that Donald Trump floated yesterday is the possibility of undoing birthright citizenship. So the question is, he's going to try to undo birthright citizenship. He's going to try to cancel it. We've had birthright citizenship for well over 100 years. The question is, can he do it? We'll talk about what the Constitution says about birthright citizenship when we get back.
And when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute.
Okay,
Full
clear.
weaponization of the federal government.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. And Rob, you were mentioning on the break, I forgot to mention this when I was talking about my bride and how long we've been married, which is 43 years. You know, Jeff and Ann just getting started. Jeff, how long have you guys been married?
12 years.
Okay, so you guys are just getting rolling. But Rob, you and I, we're kind of the tortoises in the marriage movement here on the part of the Focal Point team. How about you and your bride? How long will you have been married next week?
Well, we have the same vintage year. We're 43 years next week, and so that makes it your anniversary this week, Susan and my anniversary next week.
So 43 years, that's 76, a good year to marry a bride. That's the bottom line there. Speaking of tortoises, which I kind of dragged in by the hair of his little chinny chin chin, the oldest living thing right now in America is a tortoise that's 121 years old. I got to see if I can find my story about this.
Tortoise?
There's a tortoise. Harry the tortoise. No. Tommy the tortoise. 121 years old. Now, if you were to ask Tommy the tortoise, this is according to Metro.co in the UK, this is a tortoise that has survived 2 world wars, 6 different monarchs in the UK, and 21 U.S. presidents, born in 1898. Now, his owner claims that his longevity can be attributed to a healthy diet of garden weeds. So there you go. Dandelions and sleeping for 6 months a year. Maybe you too can live to be 121 years old. Now I want to get to this issue on birthright citizenship, but first of all, I've got a story that I came across, and Jeff, we were talking about this earlier this morning, and this is going to be our read report for today. You know, we have talked often. I mean, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association used to classify transgenderism or transvestitism as a mental disorder. It used to be an expression of mental illness. But now they've changed all that. They've scrapped all that, purely political. But we are discovering more evidence all the time that indicates maybe they were right in the first place. Jeff, tell us what you came across.
Yeah, this is a study published by the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. It examined over 65,000 students from different institutions, different schools from all over. And what they found is those that identify as a gender minority, that's a new term, I had to go look that up, gender minority students, they have, 80% of them have at least one mental health issue. 80%.
80%. You know, and just stop just for a second there. You know, a gender minority. See what they're trying to do? This is how the left uses language to sandbag us, because they want to create the impression that if you have a problem with transgenderism, if you have a problem with the normalization of transgenderism, there is something wrong with you. You are a racist. You are a bigot. It's like finding something wrong with somebody because they're black or because they're Hispanic or because they're Asian. That's how they do it. They just change the language. They slip it in there. People don't realize the significance of it. Anyway, so 80% have some kind of mental illness or mental challenge.
And they also found that 58% of them screened positive for some type of depression. 53% of them reported of having intentionally harmed themselves in a way that was not suicidal. So they're, it sounds like cutting or just self-mutilation type stuff. That's still really high. And even this guy that wrote the article on this seemed to be pro-LGBT. You can tell by the use of his term of gender minority. He said he had to go back over these, and he compared the numbers to non-gendered minority students, just the students that were comfortable with being what they were born as. And the numbers are astounding. And he was pro-LGBT. And then, of course, the conclusion was that this was due to bullying, that they needed more transgender counselors in school, more programs, more education on transgenders, and so on and so on. Everything except Christ, that's the sad part about it.
Well,
what we're finding is these are people are now hurting kids that are hurting, is what this study shows.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, you really look at this honestly, and this is like a form of child abuse. Yeah. I mean, if you normalize transgenderism, you're telling teens it's okay to think that you're trapped in the wrong sex body. And what happens is it leads to all the stuff, Jeff, that you were talking about in here. It leads to suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, mental illness, all that kind of stuff. And who would do that? Who that loves children would do that? People think that we're being mean. We're not being mean. We love these children. We love these teenagers. We do not want to see these adults do this to them, to adopt policies and whatever that create mental illness in them. We want to help them out of that. So I would say we're the ones that love them, and those who are tolerating this are the ones that are harming them.
I would even go as far to say is that they are the real bullies in this situation. They think they're doing something wonderful, but they're actually bullying these kids.
And they're not only bullying their kids, they're bullying parents. If you have a parent of a transgender teen or a teenager who thinks that he was born in the wrong body, and wants to think about getting hormone therapy, wants to think about going through the transition, wants to think about surgical mutilation to deal with this. And parents say, no, you were born a male and you still are a male. What we need to do is to help you adjust your view of yourself with the biological reality of yourself. That's what parents want to do. They want to help them with that. And these people say, no, you're being a bully. You're being a bad parent. You're being a terrible parent. You don't know how to treat minorities. And so they bully parents into going along with this, or they'll just work right around parents altogether. And you mentioned, Jeff, one last thing. I don't know if you got the information in front of you about how the mental illness compared to mental illness among conventional students.
Yeah, there was 80% on the gender minority students. I hate using that term, but that's how it's written. Compared to 41% of cisgendered peers. And again, I didn't write the article. You could tell that the guy writing this was slanted, but he's still blown away by the numbers.
Yeah, so that's almost twice. 80% of these transgender students, so-called, have some kind of a mental issue. 45% of their normal peers, only 45% have a mental issue of one kind or another. So this is clearly...
It's about double also on students that have intentionally injured themselves.
All right. So this is clearly a threat to the health of teenagers in America. Transgenderism is a mental disorder, and it is being inflicted on innocent and vulnerable teenagers who are just trying to figure out who they are and all that kind of stuff. All right. Thanks, Jeff. Good read report. Now, let us grab, speaking of bullying, let's grab clip number 1 and clip number 2. This is Piers Morgan, our old friend Piers Morgan from the UK, and he's a liberal, calls himself a liberal, but listen to what he says here about his fellow liberals. We got 2 sound bites. We'll play one. I'll set up the second one. Let's play bout number 1.
Populism is rising because liberals have become unbearable. And I speak as a liberal, okay? In my core, I'm probably more liberal than not. Although fundamentally, I see myself as a journalist and I'd like to see both sides of all these things. And I can argue both. But liberals have become utterly, pathetically illiberal. And it's a massive problem. What's the point of calling yourself a liberal if you don't allow anyone else to have a different view? This snowflake culture that we now operate in, the victimhood culture, everyone has to think a certain way, behave a certain way. Everyone has to, have a bleeding heart and tell you 20 things that are wrong with them. And, I just think it's all completely skewed to an environment where everyone's offended by everything. And no one's allowed to say a joke.
And we've talked about this frequently before, that the one trait that all liberals share in common is they have no sense of humor. As JD's boyhood friend Matt said, not his boyfriend, his boyhood friend, as he said, they have lost their senses of humor. They can't take a joke. They don't find life funny unless it's mean. They can be mean and cruel and think they're being funny. No, they're not. They're just being mean and cruel. They have no sense of humor. And he says, they have become unbearable. This is Piers Morgan's word. You can't stand to be around them hardly, because they're judgmental, they are condemning, they are illiberal. Liberal used to mean you were kind of tolerant and you had some pretty wide limits of what you would be willing to consider or what you would be willing to put up with. Not any longer. He says they are illiberal, pathetically illiberal, because they want to shut down anyone and everyone who disagrees with them. And then listen to what he says in clip 2. This is a very revealing soundbite.
And I understand why the liberals, my side, if you like, are getting it so horribly wrong. They just want to tell people not just how to lead their lives, but if you don't lead it the way I tell you to. It's a kind of version of fascism. If you don't lead the life the way I'm telling you to, then I'm going to ruin your life. I'm going to scream abuse at you. I'm going to get you fired from your job. I'm going to get you hounded by your family and friends. I'm going to make you the most disgusting human being in the world.
That's amazing. I mean, that is about as honest and accurate as you can get. And this is a liberal, a self-identified liberal saying this. Basically what he's saying, if you scratch the surface of a liberal, you will find a fascist underneath the skin. You peel back a liberal, you're going to find a fascist underneath there. You know, and I think this is absolutely true. That right now, liberals in America, what I call regressives, because they want to take us backwards, back before the days where we were truly a tolerant people. They want to drag us backwards. They're regressives. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, is that regressives or liberals do not lack the will to punish us, to silence us, to confine us, to neutralize us, to lock us up. They only lack the power. If regressives had the power, they would do the very kind of things that Piers Morgan is talking about. Right now, all they can do is scream at us. They can get us hounded by people. They can set out to ruin our lives, get us fired from our jobs, make other people think that we are the most disgusting human beings in the world. And remember, that's exactly what Jesus was talking about. He said, look, this will happen to you if you follow me without apology, if you stand up for the truth that I've taught you, and you don't bend, you don't waver, don't back down. People are going to hate you, and they are going to try to punish you, and they are going to try to exclude you. That's exactly what Piers Morgan is talking about. This is Jesus' teaching come to life. All right, well, let's talk here about Donald Trump and his re-election chances. By the way, I'm looking at a piece here. I'm going to have to take more time and dissect this a little bit more. But Donald Trump obviously is going to be running for re-election. The big article by the Associated Press. This is Associated Press writing this column, and they cannot stop talking in this piece about how many promises that Donald Trump has made to conservatives that he has fulfilled. They quote Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel that he has kept 90%. He has, he's achieved 90% of the goals. He's fulfilled 90% of the goals that Matt Staver and other conservative leaders had compiled for President Trump. He's already met them. So promises made, promises kept. You want a president that keeps his word. Donald Trump is your dude. You know, you think about what happened with Planned Parenthood, defunding Planned Parenthood. 400 Planned Parenthood clinics are closing up shop because they're not eligible for Title X funding any longer. $60 million hit Planned Parenthood is going to be taken because of that. You know, and Jeff told us last week about a change from this administration, a rule that will shield federal contractors from being punished for operating their businesses, their enterprise, according to their deeply held religious values. They won't be fired if they don't. They won't have their contracts canceled with the federal government if they won't hire the people that people on the left say they have to hire. You're not going to get punished for that any longer. Used to be, if you had a biblical view, you wanted to hire employees that shared your moral values, shared your worldview. Maybe it was important to you because of the kind of business that you operated. Maybe values was extremely important, like a Christian bookstore, for instance. And before, if you didn't hire everybody the left told you to hire, you would get punished. You would not be allowed to engage in, to sign any contracts with the federal government. Donald Trump said, we're going to end all of that. We're going to allow people to run their businesses based on their deeply held religious convictions, and we are not going to punish them for those views. So that's what Donald Trump is doing. And it's interesting. We'll play a couple of sound bites coming back about that reflect on where the American people are at when it comes to the election, to the 2020 election. And a lot of people don't like Donald Trump, but his approval ratings on the economy are around 65%. That means one thing: he is highly likely to get reelected, because most people, when push comes to shove, they are going to vote their pocketbook. All right, we will be right back with more heading into the last segment. This is the fastest 60 minutes in American media. So strap in, buckle up, and here we go. We'll be right back.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF.
To Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy. Welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media. Hitting the home stretch here. Be sure that your shoulder belt is fastened and your seats and trays are in the upright and locked position. Here is the Religion of Peace update for today. You know, you realize Europe has just been swarmed by Muslim immigrants, illegal Muslim immigrants. They've been taking them in by the boatload, and now they are starting to realize what they have done because they have not been listening to Focal Point for the last 10 years. I could have warned them. I could have told them this was coming, but no, they didn't listen. And so here's what they're dealing with. Here is in Sweden, and, you know, and some of this stuff, you just can't wish it away. You can't explain it away if you're on the left. This is what it is. In Sweden, the sales of pepper spray are up 90%. You know why? Because of the Muslim rape epidemic. Their young women in Sweden are being raped by Muslim migrants at an alarming rate. And so these girls are now out there buying pepper spray by the boatload just to protect themselves. 85% of all of the convicted assault rapists in Sweden were born outside of Europe. You know what they're trying to do is do everything they can to avoid saying the M word. In cases where the victim did not know the attacker, the proportion of foreign offenders, read Muslim migrants, was more than 80%. A study by a Swedish newspaper found that 88% of gang rapists in Sweden have had a migrant background, meaning they are Muslims. Migrants from Muslim-majority nations commit 84% of very violent rapes in Sweden. All right, so that's the latest update on the religion of peace. Here's another update. The reported number of illnesses among vapers, that is, people who vape, who use these vape things, and they vape nicotine rather than smoking cigarettes. They vape, and this is supposed to be the healthy alternative. But they are discovering now, Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control are saying, look, what's going on when these students vape, it does something to their lungs. It's like breathing in something caustic. I read a story about a kid yesterday, nearly died because he couldn't breathe. His lungs had been so impacted by the vaping, by the caustic stuff, that he was breathing. You know, it'd be like breathing asbestos or working in a coal mine. It's the same kind of thing. It damages the lungs. This is Associated Press. The number of breathing illnesses reported among people who vape is growing. Health officials are now looking at more than 150 possible cases in 16 different states. Doctors say the illnesses resemble an inhalation injury, with the lungs apparently reacting to a caustic substance. Now here's an interesting story. Well, let's play clip number 3 for you. Here's Harry Inton. This guy is an election prognosticating guru, and here's what he has to say about Donald Trump and his chances of being reelected. Let's listen.
His approval rating on those issues, 32% on race relations, 36% on gun policy, and even the economy, right? 50%. That's even down a little bit over the past few months. And indeed, we can see that. If you look at the economic conditions, are they good? Well, if we look, 65% now say they are good. But that's actually down at the lower part of that range again. May, he was at 70%, so he's seen a 5-point drop. That's even lower than it was last December when he was at 67%. So even a strength for the president right now is not as much of a strength as it used to be.
Only 65% of the people like what he's doing with an economy. So, yeah, he must be getting weaker by the day. And again, remember, people vote their pocketbook. And if this economy remains strong, about the only thing that could torpedo Trump and keep him out of the White House would be a financial meltdown. And this is what the left is actually hoping for. Remember, the left started off by saying, they started off by trying to do the Trump-Russia thing. That didn't work. They tried to do the impeachment thing. That hasn't worked. It ain't going to work. 72% of Democrats want it, but 73% of Republicans are opposed. You can't impeach somebody with numbers like that. There has to be a nationwide consensus like you had with Richard Nixon, like you didn't have with Bill Clinton, if somebody's going to be impeached and actually removed from office. But here's a story asking voters if they think Trump's going to win in 2020. 63% of them say yes. These are voters of all stripes. This is a poll done by Scott Rasmussen. 63% of American voters believe that President Trump will serve a second term in the White House. That is up 17 percentage points from February. So the American people, the voters who are actually going to vote for him, the next president, 63% of them, and that number is growing by the day, think that he is going to win re-election. All right, so the number of people who believe it's likely that the president will be reelected has grown nearly every month. All right, so impeachment, not going to do anything about that. That would just be a suicide mission. All right, well, and so the Democrats now know that the only thing that can take Donald Trump out would be a recession. Let's listen to this little montage in clip number 4. And Democrats, ladies and gentlemen, are rooting for a recession. They are cheering for a recession. They are hoping for a recession, even though it will hurt ordinary American people. You have a recession. Who gets hurt the first? The people that are at the bottom of the economic ladder. They take it right in the chin. They don't care about that. They want a recession because they now realize it is their only hope of taking Trump out. Let's listen to clip 4.
One way you get rid of Trump is a crashing economy, so please bring on the recession.
Why are people talking about a recession? And you say it's here.
Do we need to buckle up?
Fasten your seatbelts here.
There are indicators that the U.S. could be headed for a recession.
Could be headed for a recession.
Inching toward a recession.
They say potential recession on the horizon.
Happening now, recession fears.
What are the odds that you see of a recession?
Recession?
Recession.
Recession.
Recession politics.
Including the United States is taking a step toward recession. What does that mean for this presidency?
It's political suicide.
Growing fears about a possible recession.
Growing fears of a possible recession.
Fears of a recession.
The fears of a recession.
At some point, there's going to be a recession.
Economy goes south. He is in a world of hurt.
There probably are some critics cheering for a recession.
Possible recession.
You know, the recession.
Recession.
Recession. Recession.
Recession.
No, I'm not wishing for a recession.
Well, you should wish for a recession because that will definitely get him unelected.
So that's Bill Maher and his infinite wisdom. Hope for a recession because that will get him unelected. So notice how callous these people are. These are the people that say they are the paragons of compassion. They love everybody. They love migrants. They love people who want to come into this country illegally. They don't love babies that are still in the womb. They want us to believe they are the people of compassion. They don't care who gets hurt. As long as they get what they want politically, they don't care how many Americans, ordinary Americans, get chewed up in the process. So is a recession good for America? No, it is not. Is it good for the Democrats? Yes, it is. So they love it. They're rooting for it. They want it to happen. They're looking for the signs, like Elijah seeing the cloud the size of a man's hand. That's what they're looking for when it comes to a recession. So you're going to hear stories now. This is their new deal. You're going to read stories every day, almost every day of the week, talking about signs of an impending recession. Ignore it, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry about it. If it happens, it happens. Not a thing we can do to stop it. But they want you to live in fear that the bottom is going to fall out because that is good for them. If it's good for America, it's good for Trump, which means it's bad for them. These people do not want the best for America, and this is an indication. Stephanie Ruhle, clip number 11. She's on MSNBC, and listen, she wants us to be fine with the bottom falling out of the economy. Let's listen.
But a recession is okay. A recession is a normal part of economic activity. We see them upturns and downturn. A recession doesn't mean it's a crisis. But if you're a sitting president, you don't necessarily want a recession on your watch. You want people feeling good. But seeing that we have been in economic expansion for the better part of 10 years, it's about time we get a recession.
It is about time, Stephanie Ruhle says, that we get a recession. So those are your modern regressives, ladies and gentlemen, rooting against the American economy. All right, well, very quickly, let's grab clip number 5. This is our old friend Fredo, or as Jeff would prefer he be known as is Frodo, Chris Cuomo of CNN. And remember, a guy referred to him as Fredo at a bar in New York. I think I said Florida originally. It was a bar in New York. And Chris Cuomo threatened to throw him down the stairs for calling him Fredo. Anyway, Fredo is frustrated by Donald Trump, but not for the reason that you might think. He said, you look at what's happened. You look at what happened to George Bush when he was president. 2 terms, his hair went gray, looked haggard and worn by the end. You look at what happened to Barack Obama, young, youthful when he started. By the time he was done, his hair was gray. He looked like a grandpa. Here is Frodo talking about Donald Trump.
It's been almost 3 years since Trump won the presidency. It looks exactly the same. I mean, his hair is like, I don't know what's going on with that. But look, he may do things that presidents in the past haven't done to augment their physical reality. But it could also be that he doesn't care the way others have.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
Brian, I think I'm going to have to rethink that nickname. Frodo's much more likable.
Yeah. And Fredo was the guy, that was the weak brother in The Godfather. That's why Chris Cuomo went off. It was an insult to him that he was being compared to the brother in the Godfather saga that was so incompetent, so inept. He wound up trying to betray Michael Corleone and got taken out in a boat and dumped in the lake. Anyway, so Jeff rethinking the Frodo thing. We'll stay current with all of that. So, so everybody's getting older by the day. This is what frustrates Chris Cuomo. People are getting older by the day. Everybody else's mind is going. And there's Donald Trump going full speed. Hadn't lost a step. It's driving them absolutely crazy. So Trump is going to outlast them, and they know it. So if they can't take him out, they've got really, really huge problems. So that's the latest from the regressive left. And Chris Cuomo's explanation is that Donald Trump just doesn't care about anything or anybody. So that's why he's okay with it. That's why he's not getting older. He just doesn't care. America goes down the tubes. He doesn't care. It's the left that doesn't care. In fact, it's the left that's actually rooting for people to suffer. They want the economy to go down the tubes, so the American people will suffer because they think that's what will get Donald Trump out of office. All right, clip number 6. Here is Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a guy who has a memory that is so good, he can remember things that never happened. Let's listen.
And I think that the behavior of this administration has awakened a whole new generation to get engaged in ways they may not have gotten before. Just like in my generation, when I got out of school, that when Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King had been assassinated in the 70s, late 70s, when I got engaged, up to that time, remember, none of you women will know this, but a couple men may remember. That was a time in the late 60s, or the early 60s and 60s, where it was drop out, go to Haight-Ashbury, don't get engaged, don't trust anybody over 30. I mean, for real.
It sounds like maybe Joe spent a little too much time up in Haight-Ashbury. That was big when I was in college. I went up there. That's where all the potheads hung out in San Francisco. It was just getting big. Summer of Love, 1968, 1969, all that kind of stuff. But as you are aware, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated in the 60s. 1965 for Bobby Kennedy. Oh, no, it was 1968 for both of them. Both of them assassinated in 1968. Joe Biden is 10 years off. He's got it in the late 70s. That's why Chris Cuomo's going nuts, because it's happening to everybody but Donald Trump. All right, very quickly, I don't really have enough time. I'm just going to start into this, and I will pick up on this tomorrow, and it has to do with whether birthright citizenship is constitutional or not. Donald Trump said yesterday he's going to try to do something about birthright citizenship. He wants to bring it to an end. He thinks it's ridiculous. In fact, he's right about this. There are only 2 countries in the civilized world, count them, 2 countries in the civilized world that offer citizenship based simply on being born there. You can be born to non-native parents, and if you're born in their land, that makes you only one other nation in the world. I don't even know which one it is. But only one other nation in the world is foolish enough to grant citizenship just because you happen to be born here. Donald Trump wants to do something about it. Now, this has been the practice or the custom in the United States for well over 100 years. It goes back into the 19th century. And so the question is it constitutional? Does the Constitution require that if a child is born here, that he be granted American citizenship? I'm going to have the answer to that question for you tomorrow, so you'll definitely want to tune in tomorrow. Got another story for tomorrow. John Solomon writes for The Hill. He's got a great piece about the 10 documents that Donald Trump is threatening to declassify. Remember, he can declassify anything he wants. He's the president. And John Solomon says if he declassifies these 10 documents, the left will be toast. Bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap where God's put you. Never forget, we are fighting a winnable war.
The views and opinions expressed